Imagine remembering a world where you had to memorize your friends' phone numbers, where if someone wasn't home, you simply couldn't reach them, where boredom was normal and silence wasn't something people rushed to fill. Now imagine growing up just in time to witness the internet arrive. Smartphones take over, and social media reshape how humans connect. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, psychologists say you belong to one of the most fascinating micro-generations ever studied, a group often called Xennials, and their psychology is unlike any generation before or after them, because they didn't grow up entirely in the analog world, but they didn't grow up digital either. They grew up in the middle of a transformation. And that strange timing quietly shaped how they think, connect, work, and even how they understand themselves. To understand the psychology of Xennials, you have to picture a childhood that looks very different from today. It's the early 1990s. You want to call your friends, so you dial their house phone. If their parents answer, you politely ask if they're home. If they aren't, you hang up and try again later. If you make plans to meet someone, you show up at the time and place you agreed on. There's no texting, no running late, no location sharing. You just hope they're there. If you miss a TV show, it's gone. If you want information, you search through books or ask someone who knows more than you. And perhaps most importantly, there are long stretches of boredom. Not the kind where you scroll through your phone for 5 minutes and call it boredom. Real boredom. The kind where the mind has nothing to consume, so it starts creating its own stimulation. You imagine stories, you think about life, you explore your surroundings. Psychologists have long understood that boredom plays an important role in cognitive development. It encourages creativity, reflection, and patience, and Xennials grew up with a lot of it. But here's where their story becomes psychologically unique. Just as they were entering adolescence and early adulthood, the world changed. Not slowly, not gradually, almost overnight. Suddenly, there was the internet, email, chat rooms, instant messaging, then social media, then smartphones. Within about 15 years, the entire structure of communication transformed, and Xennials were right in the middle of it. Most generations grow up entirely inside one system. Boomers learned a world built on physical communication and stable institutions. Gen Z grew up inside a fully digital ecosystem. But Xennials experienced something very different. They had to relearn how the world worked while their identities were still forming. And that matters psychologically. The brain's prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for adaptability, long-term planning, and complex decision-making, continues developing well into the mid-20s. Which means many Xennials were still in this critical window of mental flexibility when the digital revolution arrived. They were young enough to adapt quickly, but old enough to remember the world before it. That combination created a rare cognitive advantage. They became bilingual in two different realities. They understand the logic of the analog world, and they understand the speed of the digital one. For example, think about how Xennials relate to technology. Older generations sometimes struggle with new platforms because their habits formed before digital systems existed. Younger generations often take technology for granted because they've never experienced life without it. But Xennials remember both. They remember waiting. They remember searching for information in physical places. They remember conversations that disappeared instead of living forever online. And because of that, many Xennials have a very different relationship with privacy. Imagine making a mistake as a teenager in the early 1990s. Maybe you said something embarrassing. Maybe you wore a ridiculous haircut. Maybe you had an awkward breakup. A handful of people might remember it, but eventually the moment fades. There's no permanent digital record. But in today's world, many experiences live online forever. Photos, messages, videos, posts. For Xennials, this shift feels strange. They know what life was like before everything became documented, which is why many of them instinctively protect their privacy more than younger generations. It's not that they don't understand social media. It's that they remember what life felt like without it. Another fascinating psychological trait of Xennials is their relationship with change. Because they grew up during one of the fastest technological transitions in human history, many of them developed a quiet adaptability. They don't panic when systems evolve. They've seen it happen before. Think about the technology they've adapted to in just one lifetime. Rotary phones turned into mobile phones. Letters turned into emails. Libraries turned into search engines. CDs turned into streaming. Entire industries disappeared and reappeared in new forms. This constant adaptation shaped how they approach uncertainty. Instead of expecting stability, many Xennials operate with an internal mindset that says, "The world can change suddenly. Be ready." This doesn't necessarily make them pessimistic, but it often makes them practical realists. And that mindset shows up especially in how they think about careers and security. Many Xennials entered the workforce during turbulent economic periods. Some graduated into the dot-com crash in the early 2000s. Others were just beginning their careers when the 2008 financial crisis hit. Psychologists studying economic hardship have found that instability during early adulthood can have long-lasting psychological effects. It changes how people think about money, risk, and long-term planning. For many Xennials, financial security never felt guaranteed, which is why they often develop backup plans, side skills, or multiple income streams. Not necessarily because they're naturally entrepreneurial, but because experience taught them that stability can disappear. Yet despite this caution, Xennials also tend to carry something else from their childhood: a deeper tolerance for solitude. Remember those long stretches of boredom from earlier? Before smartphones filled every empty moment, people had to learn how to exist with their thoughts. Waiting in line meant staring into space. Riding the bus meant watching the world pass by. Evenings sometimes meant sitting quietly with nothing to do. Those moments might seem trivial, but they taught an important psychological skill: the ability to be alone with your mind. Many younger generations rarely experience this. The moment silence appears, a screen fills it. But Xennials remember a time when internal reflection was unavoidable. And that often creates a different mental rhythm. They can move through digital environments easily, but they still crave moments of disconnection. You might notice this in subtle habits. Many Xennials enjoy technology, but also periodically step away from it. They might scroll social media for a while, then suddenly feel an urge to disconnect. Not because they hate technology, but because they remember what the world felt like when attention wasn't constantly fragmented. In many ways, this generation carries a quiet tension. Part of them appreciates the convenience of modern life. But another part misses something harder to describe: the slower pace, the deeper conversations, the feeling that not every moment needed to be shared or recorded. And perhaps that's the defining psychological experience of Xennials. They remember before, they adapted to after, but they belong completely to neither. And there's something powerful about that position, because living through massive change teaches a unique skill: perspective. When you've seen the world transform once, you realize it can transform again. Technology will keep evolving. Social norms will keep shifting. The future will keep surprising us, but Xennials already know something important. Humans adapt. They always have. And maybe that's the quiet lesson hidden inside this generation's story. They didn't just witness the transition from analog to digital. They lived it. Which means they understand something many people forget. Progress doesn't erase the past. It builds on it. And sometimes the people standing between two worlds are the ones who understand both the best.